There is a being in the ancient texts that no church service ever fully describes. Not because it is obscure, not because the evidence is thin, but because what the texts say about it is too uncomfortable to repeat from a pulpit on a Sunday morning. Every tradition has a name for it. Judaism calls it the Mal'akh HaMavet, the angel of death. Islam calls it Azrael, though the Quran itself never uses this name, leaving the being deliberately unnamed, as if the name carries weight that should not be spoken carelessly. Christianity inherits it through a dozen Old Testament passages describing something that moves through cities and armies and households in the night, leaving silence where there had been life. We have made it gentle, a hood and a scythe, a metaphor for the inevitability of mortality. The ancient texts made no such accommodation. In the ancient texts, the angel of death is not a metaphor. It is an agent, a being of specific function, specific appearance, specific method, dispatched with precision to specific targets at specific moments in history. This is the being that killed 185,000 men in a single night, that entered the houses of an entire nation while they pressed blood on their doorframes in terror, that struck a man dead for touching an object he was not permitted to touch. This is not the gentle harvester of popular imagination. This is something the ancient world actually feared, and it is time to read what they actually wrote about it. Begin with a question the tradition almost never asks directly. What is the angel of death? In the earliest strata of the Hebrew Bible, there is no single angel of death. There is the Mal'akh Yahweh, the angel of the Lord, a being whose appearances are ambiguous in ways that have troubled scholars for centuries. Sometimes a messenger, sometimes a warrior, sometimes so close to God that the distinction between the messenger and the sender collapses entirely. The Talmudic tradition attempted to systematize what the text left ambiguous. In this tradition, the angel of death, Samael in some text, Mal'akh HaMavet in others, is not evil. It is not a demon. It is not fallen. It is a created instrument of divine will, a being whose function is the termination of life, performed with neither pleasure nor reluctance. But the tradition also preserved something darker. The angel of death, in certain texts, is described as having desires, as taking something from the process of death that sustains it. A being of divine power that is hungry is a very different thing from a simple instrument of divine will. The first great appearance of the destroying angel in the biblical text is one of the most iconic passages in all of Scripture. Egypt, the final plague. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the prisoner, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Every firstborn, in one night, across an entire nation. The Israelites were instructed to paint lamb's blood on their doorframes. The reason given is explicit and chilling. He will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. Two things deserve careful attention. First, the agent of the deaths is not God acting directly, but the destroyer, Hamashchit, a being distinct enough that God must instruct it, restrain it, direct it away from specific houses. Second, the blood on the doorframe is not a symbol. It is literal armor against a literal threat. The families of Israel were genuine targets. The blood was the only thing between them and the destroyer. And the destroyer moved through the city anyway. But the destroyer at Passover was not the most terrifying single appearance of the angel of death in the biblical text. That distinction belongs to a night 7 centuries later. The Assyrian Empire under Sennacherib was the most powerful military force the ancient world had yet produced. His army had destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, taken 46 Judean cities, and was now camped outside Jerusalem. Sennacherib sent a letter to King Hezekiah, essentially a theological argument. Every nation the Assyrians had destroyed had been protected by gods, and those gods had not saved them. Hezekiah took the letter into the temple and spread it before God. The prophet Isaiah brought a response. Jerusalem would not fall. And then the text records what happened in a single verse that has haunted readers for 3,000 years. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. One night, one angel, 185,000 men. The mathematics alone are staggering. Even if the angels spent only 1 second on each soldier, 185,000 deaths would take over 50 hours. The text says it happened in a single night. This is not a being that works like anything in the natural world. It operates outside the constraints of time and space as human beings experience them. It can be everywhere in a camp simultaneously. It can terminate life faster than the human mind can calculate. And then the verse ends. The angel is not mentioned again. It performed its function and withdrew. The Greek historian Herodotus preserves a version of this event. He mentions field mice gnawing the Assyrians' bowstrings, rendering them unable to fight. Modern historians speculate about plague moving through a crowded encampment, but the biblical text is not interested in the mechanism of the physical deaths. It is interested in the agent. The Talmud was not satisfied with the silence the biblical text maintained around the nature of the destroyer. The rabbinical tradition filled that silence with extraordinary detail. The angel of death is covered in eyes, on its body, on its hands, covering it from every angle. Nothing escapes its notice. Nothing is hidden from its gaze. Every living being it approaches is already fully seen. The Talmud also describes the mechanism of death itself. The angel of death stands over the dying person and holds a sword. On the tip of the sword is a drop of bitter gall, mara. And when the dying person opens their mouth in their final moment, the drop falls in. This is what kills them. This is the taste of death. And the tradition adds something more disturbing still. The gall on the sword is not merely a mechanism. It is distilled from every human life the being has ever terminated, an essence of mortality itself carried on the tip of a sword that has been used since the first death in human history. The angel of death does not merely end lives. It extracts something from each ending and carries it forward. There is a passage in 2 Samuel that records one of the most vivid and specific encounters with the destroying angel in all of Scripture. David has sinned by conducting a census. The punishment offered is a choice: 3 years of famine, 3 months of military defeat, or 3 days of plague. David chooses the plague. His reasoning is revealing. Better to fall into the hands of God than the hands of men. What follows is one of the only passages where the angel of death is depicted in something approaching physical action seen by multiple witnesses. David looked up and saw the angel of the Lord standing between heaven and earth, with a drawn sword in his hand extended over Jerusalem. Standing between heaven and earth. In the threshold that belongs to neither realm, visible to human eyes but not bound by the physical world. The plague had already killed 70,000 people in 3 days. The sword was raised over Jerusalem. Then God said, "Enough. Withdraw your hand." The angel stopped at the threshing floor of Araunah. That specific location, that specific moment. David built an altar on that spot. The threshing floor of Araunah became the site on which Solomon would later build the temple. The holiest place in the ancient world was identified by the spot where the angel of death stopped. In the book of Numbers, the destroying angel appears in a context that reveals something crucial about its nature. The people are in rebellion. God's anger burns. A plague begins moving through the camp. It kills 24,000 people and then stops. Not because the disease ran its course, not because natural conditions changed. It stops because Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron, takes a spear and drives it through an Israelite man and a Midianite woman in a single act of zeal. And the plague stops. What was moving through the camp that responded, that could be caused to withdraw by a single human act? The Talmud identifies it explicitly as the angel of death operating under divine commission. The detail that it could be stopped is one of the most theologically charged in all the accounts of the destroyer's activity. It was not inevitable. It responded to something happening among the living. It could be called off. Which means there were 24,001 people who should have died that day and did not. People who felt the approach of something and then felt it recede. Who woke the next morning alive when they should not have been. What does it do to a person to carry that knowledge? In the Islamic tradition, the angel of death has a name and a cosmic scale that exceeds anything in the Jewish or Christian accounts. Azrael. The name appears not in the Quran itself, but in the Hadith literature and the vast tradition of Islamic angelology that developed in the centuries following the revelation. The physical description of Azrael in the Islamic tradition is one of the most staggering in any religious literature. His body is so vast that if the first heaven were placed on one shoulder and the earth on the other, there would still be space. His feet stand in the east, and his head reaches past the seventh heaven. His body is covered in eyes and tongues beyond counting, one for each living soul on earth. But the most significant detail is the mechanism of the angel's function. Every soul on earth is connected to Azrael by a thread, invisible to human perception but absolutely real in the angelic realm. When the moment of death comes, the moment written in the Law and Mahfuz, the preserved tablet before the creation of the world, Azrael does not travel to the dying person. He simply draws the thread. The Islamic tradition elaborates on how the thread is drawn with a specificity that is both comforting and terrifying. For the righteous, the withdrawal is gentle, like a hair drawn from dough. For the wicked, it is violent, like a many-pronged instrument dragged through wet wool. The body resists, the soul is torn free. And Azrael, throughout all of this, remains impassive. Not cruel, not merciful, simply present, performing a function assigned to him since before the earth existed. A function that will continue until the last soul on earth has been drawn back. And then, the tradition says, Azrael himself will die. The last death, administered by the divine will directly. Even the angel of death is not exempt from death. The Quran captures this economy in a single verse. Say, the angel of death, who is charged concerning you, will cause you to die, and afterward unto your Lord you will be returned. Charged concerning you, not humanity in general, you, individually. There is an aspect of Azrael's commission that is personal to every human being alive. There is a story in the Talmud unlike any other in the entire tradition. It is the story of a man who escaped the angel of death. Joshua ben Levi, one of the great Talmudic sages, had an encounter with the angel of death and, in the course of it, managed to seize the angel's sword. He refused to return it, and the angel of death, without its sword, could not perform its function. The divine voice intervened. Joshua was instructed to return the sword. He obeyed. But in the moment before he returned it, in the single moment when a human being held the sword of the angel of death, Joshua ben Levi looked at the blade. The tradition does not describe what he saw. It only records that he looked. And it records that when Joshua ben Levi eventually died, he was taken to paradise directly, without judgment, without the usual accounting. As if the glimpse of what the sword contained, the experience of holding even for a moment the instrument through which every human death had been administered, had already shown him everything there was to see and left him with nothing left to fear. The man who looked at the sword of the angel of death died unafraid. The book of Job contains a description of the angel of death, hidden in plain sight in one of the most examined texts in biblical literature. Job, in his suffering, describes the being he fears most. He calls it Bela, the devourer, and names it the king of terrors. Not the king of death, the king of terror. The distinction is theologically significant. Death is a fact. Terror is an experience. And the angel of death, in Job's framing, is primarily concerned not with the fact of death, but with the dread that precedes and accompanies it. The anticipation that makes the approach of death its own form of torment before the final moment arrives. This is why the angel of death in the tradition is described as visible to the dying person before death comes, not as a mercy, but as a deliberate extension of its essential nature. The dying person sees what is coming. The knowing is part of what the king of terrors administers. And in that complete seeing, in the angel's total, undivided attention on the person it has come for. The tradition describes a terrible intimacy. The angel of death knows every human being it comes for more completely than any other being ever has. It has been present at every death in human history. It has seen every human life in its final moment of completeness. It is the witness to everything. In the Kabbalistic tradition, the angel of death intersects with the figure of Samael in ways that the official theology has never been entirely comfortable with. Samael, whose name is interpreted as poison of God or left hand of God, is a being in a theological gray zone. He is the prosecuting angel, the accuser, the adversary. He is the angel of death and the angel of Rome and the angel of empire, appearing wherever there is death and the crushing of the weak by the strong. But in the Kabbalistic system, Samael is not simply evil. He is necessary. He is the left side of the divine structure, the side of severity, of judgment, of the strict application of law without mercy. Without Samael, there is no judgment. Without judgment, there is no justice. Without justice, the divine structure itself collapses. The angel of death is not an anomaly in the divine order. It is a load-bearing element. God made it, intended it. The tradition that holds this truth most clearly is also the tradition that prays most fervently to be spared from its presence for as long as possible. Because knowing that death is necessary does not make the sword less sharp or the gall less bitter. It simply means that what you are afraid of is part of the plan. The New Testament inherits the angel of death without ever quite naming it. The book of Revelation contains the fourth horseman, the pale rider whose name is Death and who is followed by Hades. Built from the same textual DNA as the sword-bearing angel of 2 Samuel, the destroyer of Egypt, the executioner of Sennacherib's army. But Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, is more direct. And do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. A casual reference, almost parenthetical, as if Paul's readers knew exactly what he was talking about and what the stakes were. The destroying angel was not an Old Testament relic to Paul's audience. It was a present reality. The letter to the Hebrews makes the same assumption in its meditation on the Passover. The author writes that Moses kept the Passover so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. Present tense implied, an ongoing presence whose activity is restrained rather than eliminated. A being that still moves and still requires restraint, whose attention is something to be actively avoided rather than a past event to be commemorated. The blood on the doorframe, repurposed, reapplied. The destroyer still moving. The tradition preserves a detail about the angel of death that functions less as theology and more as warning. It cannot be bribed. This seems obvious, but the tradition makes the point with a specificity that implies people tried. That throughout history, human beings have offered wealth, religious merit, the prayers of the righteous, every form of currency that has ever been used to move the divine will. The angel of death is not moved. Not because it is cruel, but because it operates on a different economy. The currency that moves the divine will, prayer, repentance, righteousness, operates in the realm of the living. It can extend life. It can change the decree. It can cause the sword to be withdrawn, as it was over Jerusalem when David built his altar. But once the commission is given, once the thread is drawn, the negotiation happens before. In the living days, in the ordinary moments when the sword is still sheathed, every account of the destroyer points toward the same conclusion. The angel of death is real, is present, and is coming. The question is not how to escape it. The question is what you will have done with the time between its last visit and its next. The Talmud records a conversation between the angel of death and a great rabbi, in which the rabbi asks directly, "Why do you pursue us? Why do you not leave us to live?" And the angel of death answers, "I do not pursue you. I am sent. I come when I am sent and not before. I take when I am commanded and not more. I have never taken a life before its appointed time, and I have never left a life past it. I do not pursue you. I wait for you." Not pursuit, appointment. The destroying angel is not hunting. It is waiting. At a specific place. At a specific moment written before the person it waits for was born. And this, more than the eyes, more than the sword, more than the gall on the blade, is what the ancient world actually feared about the angel of death. Not that it was arbitrary, not that it was cruel, not that it might come too soon, but that it was precise. The angel of death does not hate humanity. This is perhaps the most important thing the tradition says, and the thing most easily lost in the accumulated weight of all the terror the texts preserve. The tradition that describes it with the most horror is the same tradition that understood it most clearly. The angel of death is a created being, performing a function it was made for, waiting at an appointed moment that has been written since before the world began. It is not your enemy. It is your appointment. And every account of it, the blood on the doorframes, the sword withdrawn over Jerusalem, the plague stopped by Phinehas, the thread extended by righteousness. Every account points toward the same living question that the texts have always been asking. Not, how do we escape it? But, what will you do with the days you have been given while the sword is still sheathed, while the eyes are still elsewhere, while the thread is still undrawn and the appointment has not yet come? The sword is drawn. The appointment is kept. The thread is drawn.